This is a video about diatonic modulation. We have encountered modulation to different keys before, but today we are going to discover more about how this new and exciting musical device can be used. Take a look at this example. Listen to the recording and follow along with the score.
Schildert wirst du, Freund, soll ich dir Elise. Möchte Muts und Geist in mich sich ergießen.
Take a moment to pause the video and write down the jazz chords. If you wrote down the following jazz chords, you are correct. Are there any secondary dominants in this example? If you said yes, you are partly correct. There are 3 chords in the example that do not belong to the key of G major. Which ones are they? That's right. It's the A major and A major minor 7th chords. These chords contain C sharp, which is a pitch not idiomatic of the key of G major. Now take a moment to pause the video and fill in the Roman numerals. If you wrote down something similar to what we have here, good work. The analysis provided here is an accurate, but not ideal, labeling of the harmonies in this example. Does the analysis of the second system seem strange to you? It should, because there are a lot of secondary dominants progressing to the same dominant triad. We want our Roman numerals to express what is happening in the music as accurately as possible. Since A major and D major have a dominant to tonic relationship, and this relationship is happening over and over again, perhaps we are no longer in our original key. Maybe now we are in the key of D major. Take a moment to pause the video and write out the Roman numerals of the second system as if the music were in D major. If we were in the key of D major, the Roman numerals inside of the red box would look like this. Notice the dominant to tonic relationship is now reflected very clearly in the Roman numerals inside the red box. We can see that the 5 Roman numeral is followed by a 1 Roman numeral. Also, notice I changed my interpretation of the second to last chord. I now see that there is a cadential 6/4 chord. Now, because of the cadence, this is really looking like we're in D major. Instead of writing all of those secondary dominant Roman numerals, it would be much easier and more accurate for our Roman numerals to reflect what is actually happening in the music and change to the ones in the red box. We have modulated to a new key, the key of D major. Now we have to answer another question. How did we get to D major? How can we express this change of keys? To reflect this modulation, we use a pivot chord. Let's discuss what a pivot chord is. A pivot chord is a chord that functions diatonically in both the original and the new key. A pivot chord is also seen but not heard. It functions as an invisible hinge the music swings on from one key to the next. It connects the 2 keys together, since the chord is diatonic in both keys. Finally, a pivot chord is usually a predominant function, because these are easiest to destabilize. Pivot chords should not be dominants, though this could happen in the literature. How do we determine the location of a pivot chord? The new accidental means we are already in the new key, so the pivot chord needs to be before the appearance of this accidental. Usually this is only 1 or 2 chords behind the accidental. There we will find a chord that meets our pivot chord criteria. Let's go back to the Beethoven example. We know that the example begins in G major, but then from measure 5 until the end, we find the accidental C sharp, the leading tone of D major. But where is the pivot chord from G major to D major? Remember, one of the criteria for pivot chords is that they usually appear only 1 or 2 chords before the new accidental. If we go back 1 chord before the A major chord, we have G major. Another criteria for pivot chords is they must function diatonically in both the original and the new key. The G major chord in measure 4 functions as a tonic in the original key, but what about in D major? That's right, it's a 4 chord in D major. Let's write the 4 Roman numeral below the tonic Roman numeral. The last criteria of a pivot chord is that usually it functions as a predominant, and this requirement is met. Since the chord is right before the new accidental, it functions as a diatonic chord in both keys, and in the new key it functions as a predominant. This chord is a pivot chord. To reflect this change of key, we take our D major key indication and move it up to the pivot chord like so. Now our analysis is complete. There is one more important aspect of this example that needs to be emphasized, and that is the final cadence. In the last two measures, we get a strong cadential pattern in the new key of D major. With the presence of this cadential 6-4 to 7-5-3 to tonic progression, the new key of D major is firmly established. Let's listen to the music again.
Schöner wärst du, Freund, soll ich dir Elise. Möchte Muts und Geist in mich sich ergießen.
Now you might be asking, how do you know if something is a tonicization or a modulation? Tonicizations are localized and temporary. A chord of a musical passage is preceded by a secondary dominant, but the accidental does not remain. The accidental is introduced once, but then it goes away. In this example, the B major chord only appears once. The D sharp accidental does not remain, and we get a D natural in the following 2 chord. If you get to a cadence point, it will be in the home key. This example begins in A major and it ends in A major. The D sharp was only a temporary accidental. The B major to E major progression is only a temporary tonicization. In order for a modulation to occur, 2 important characteristics must appear. First, a modulation is when the accidental remains. It is not temporary, it appears again. Second, when you get to a cadence point, the cadence is in a key other than the home key. Let's look at the Beethoven example again to see these characteristics in action. Going back to the Beethoven example, the C sharp appears in the second system and it remains for the rest of the example. We also get a strong cadence in the new key of D major. This is a modulation. If you need more review of how pivot chords work, you can look back at Chapter 15, pages 250 through 260. Don't forget, there will be a quiz on this video at the beginning of Tuesday's class. I'll see you then.